It's the equivalent of sort of Diane Abbott's seat in London. And you can see that support for the Labour Party has collapsed within 10 months of them winning a general election. And it's not just happening here. You know, it's happening in Doncaster, it's happening in North Tyneside, it's happening all over the country. So we're obviously delighted with that. And then you go to the Tory side of it, we're in Lincolnshire. We're making the most astonishing gains. We're on the verge of taking control of Staffordshire County Council. So it's been a huge night for reform. One or two near misses in the mayoral contest, but a huge night for reform.
Perhaps not quite on the scale of a comparison with the Diane Abbott seat, but I take your wider
Well, it does a
point.
majority, yes.
I guess the challenge now comes, particularly in the council seats, in terms of if you find yourself in control or in the mayoralties, of being scrutinised for a record, a track record, as opposed to, as a critic might see it, shouting from the sidelines. That's another step up, isn't it?
I completely get that. I suspect where we win control of county councils, there'll be more scrutiny on local government than you guys have ever done for the last half a century. And that's the responsibility that we take on with glee.
A couple of jitters were there in the night about how close this was?
Well, I mean, there was a Labour Party briefing that went out that said Labour were confident of winning. I think at that moment it was, Sarah was going through quite a big emotional roller coaster, as you do. By-elections are always dramatic. This may well be, well, it's the closest by-election since the war, and I think one of the most dramatic. But I sense also one of the most significant. I said, after I won in Clacton in the last general election, I said, we've dealt with the Tories, we're now coming for the Labour Party, and boy, we are.
In a striking display of confidence, following Reform U's latest electoral success, party leader Nigel Farage has doubled down on his pledge to upend Britain's traditional political order. Speaking to BC Breakfast after Reform, UK clinched a win in the Runcorn-Helsby parliamentary by-election by 6 percentage points. Farage issued a defiant message. The Tories have been dealt with and Labour is next. I said after I won at Clacton at the last general election, we dealt with the Tories. We're now coming for the Labour Party. And boy, we are, Farage told viewers, his trademark populist bravado on full display. The by-election result, while a local contest, is being interpreted by analysts as yet another warning sign for both major parties as voter disillusionment grows. Reform UK's rise has been a thorn in the side of the Conservatives, siphoning off right-wing voters frustrated with the government's handling of immigration, economic stagnation, and what Farage has called the betrayal of Brexit. But now, Farage has Labour squarely in his sights. Labour, still leading in national polls, faces an uncomfortable new reality. Reform UK's insurgency is no longer just a threat to the Conservatives. The party's messaging on sovereignty, immigration control, and dissatisfaction with the political establishment is resonating across traditional party lines. Farage has cleverly repositioned Reform UK not just as a protest vote, but as a legitimate alternative to the political elite, regardless of whether they wear red or blue rosettes, said Dr. Helen Cartwright, a political scientist at the University of Manchester. Labour cannot ignore this threat, particularly in working-class areas where the realignment of voter loyalty is most pronounced. What distinguishes Farage's latest offensive is his clear strategy to broaden Reform UK's appeal beyond disaffected Conservatives. His post-victory speech was laced with attacks on Labour's positions on immigration, green policies, and what he labels as woke ideology, claiming they are out of touch with the values and concerns of everyday Britons. In recent weeks, Farage has also sharpened his focus on Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, accusing him of political cowardice and flip-flopping on key issues such as Brexit, energy policy, and crime. Reform UK's growing momentum is causing ripples not just in Westminster, but also among political commentators and strategists. Some warn that the traditional two-party dominance could face its most serious challenge since the rise of the Liberal Democrats in the early 2000s, but with a far more disruptive populist edge. Even some Conservative backbenchers, many of whom have lost seats or are staring down the prospect of defeat, are quietly acknowledging that Farage's movement is speaking to an anger and frustration they failed to address. For Labour, the challenge is twofold: retaining its progressive base while reconnecting with socially conservative voters in former strongholds. Voters who might now be tempted by Farage's plain-spoken anti-establishment rhetoric. Sir Keir Starmer's office has yet to issue a formal response to Farage's latest comments, but insiders suggest Labour strategists are recalibrating their messaging to blunt Reform UK's appeal, particularly in the so-called Red Wall constituencies that delivered Boris Johnson's 2019 landslide and could now be battlegrounds once again.
I like Kemi Badenoch. I said this earlier, I'll say it again. I think that she has got a really, really tough job. I think you're right, she's not cutting through. But then if you look at Margaret Thatcher in the earliest years of Thatcher being opposition leader, and actually the first few years of her government, it was disastrous. And actually she then went on by just holding her nerve. The question will be whether the Conservatives start to self-destruct by saying, actually, we're so impatient that we need to ditch her. Just on these results, by the way, I think Kent is so interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see the breakdown in Kent. Now, obviously, Kent, you've got Dover, where there is, of course, the migrants coming over, so that's much more of a national issue over a local issue. But if you were someone who thought, oh, reform, it's just, a few places in the north where they're making gains. Yeah. No, I mean, look at Kent, like, Garden of England, very, very, green, very home counties type of place. That just goes to show, picking up on your point, that the reform is coming south.
The political sands are shifting under the Conservative Party's feet, and the tremors are no longer confined to the so-called Red Wall. As Reform UK makes fresh inroads into traditional Tory strongholds in the south of England, even senior Conservative figures like Kemi Badenoch are finding themselves under increasing pressure. If you thought Reform was just a northern story, think again. Reform is coming south, and the numbers back him up. Once dismissed as a protest movement drawing disaffected voters from economically struggling post-industrial towns, Reform UK is now gaining traction in affluent commuter belts and rural constituencies that have voted Conservative for generations. Kent, often seen as a political bellwether for Middle England, has become ground zero for this emerging trend. Local polling suggests a growing slice of the electorate is turning to Nigel Farage's party, drawn by its uncompromising stance on immigration, opposition to net zero policies, and relentless criticism of both Conservative and Labour leadership. For Kemi Badenoch, tipped by many as the ideological torchbearer for the future of the Conservatives, this is an unwelcome complication. As Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Badenoch has cultivated a reputation as a straight-talking, no-nonsense voice appealing to both grassroots Tories and younger voters. But even her brand of cultural conservatism and economic realism may not be enough to stem the bleeding to Reform UK. Reform's message is resonating beyond the North because it taps into a universal sense of betrayal among many Conservative voters. Discontent over perceived backsliding on Brexit, rising taxation, wavering immigration policies, and the embrace of woke culture wars has left many feeling politically homeless. Challenge is twofold. First, she must defend her government's record while acknowledging the frustration felt by many natural Conservative voters. Second, she must position herself as the candidate who can reform the Conservatives from within, without alienating voters who are now flirting with Farage's more radical platform. Allies say she recognizes the threat and is preparing to sharpen her message on issues like border security, energy policy, and free speech. But with each speech, election and local polls suggesting a further erosion of the Tory base, time may not be on her side. Why the Conservative reform battle dominates headlines. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is watching the southern drama unfold with quiet interest. The fracturing of the Tory vote in the south could open the door for Labour gains in areas previously considered out of reach. Yet Starmer faces his own reform problem. In many seats, particularly along the Thames estuary and coastal towns, Labour and the Conservatives are bleeding support to Farage's insurgency alike.